Skyping in from Madison, Wisconsin, we have Josh Orton, the senior advisor for Progressives United and former leadership aide to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. And from Washington, D.C., we will be joined shortly by Ian Pryor of the NRCC, the acronym for the National Republican Campaign Committee for members of Congress. And for purposes of full disclosure, I resemble that remark, and no sooner do I mention Ian's name that there he shows up on the screen. So Ian, we welcome you here as we complete our panel, as it were. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me, JD.
You bet. Let's go to Josh first, and let's discuss what happened in Massachusetts. John Tierney, 9-term incumbent, going down at the hands of Iraq War veteran Seth Moulton. What happened to John Tierney yesterday?
Yeah, well, I think we saw widely reported that Tierney had faced issues in the past couple of years, that he was still struggling to fight back scandals in the news. And I think that Seth Moulton, a former Marine, is going to make a great candidate in that district. I'm not concerned about it. And look, I think that generally Republicans have looked at this cycle in November months ago as one that they thought was going to be a pickup bonanza. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen widely reported that their target list has basically been slashed in half. They're underfunded, and their reputation nationally has still been hurt by last year's government shutdown. So I actually think that they're in a much worse position than some in Washington would lead you to believe, JD.
Well, let's turn to Ian Pryor, because what Josh says is true in terms of Washington coverage and some prognostications. The Republican wave that was anticipated a few months ago appears to be slow in mounting. What is your take on the current mood, and what do you think will transpire Election Day, Ian?
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more with that, JD. I think anyone that thinks that Massachusetts 6 is a shoo-in for Democrats is sorely mistaken. I mean, the fact of the matter is, President Obama has had a worse year than the Red Sox, and they haven't had such a hot year this year. And it's showing in Massachusetts, it's showing in New Hampshire. And look, the bottom line is Seth Moulton just had $1 million spent against him by John Tierney, telling Democratic voters that Seth Moulton is some kind of sleeper Republican. So now Seth Moulton, being broke, is going to have to go raise money and at the same time repair a fractured Democratic base, while Richard Tassay is currently up on TV. He has $1 million cash on hand, and he has the experience and the ability to represent Massachusetts in the majority. And keep in mind, when the Republicans win the Senate, Massachusetts, unless they elect a Republican in Mass 6, will have no member of the majority party in either one of the houses of Congress, the Senate or the House of Representatives. And that's not good for Massachusetts.
So you're talking about this district where John Tierney lost. You're saying this will be the beachhead, the breakthrough for Republicans in Massachusetts in terms of federal office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Richard Tassay has a proven record of working across party lines. In the state legislature, he voted with Governor Romney 50% of the time. He voted against Governor Romney for 50% of the time. Now, Seth Moulton, his whole campaign against John Tierney was that Tierney was only able to pass one bill in 18 years in Congress. Well, what does Seth Moulton think he's going to be able to do as a freshman member of a minority where there's a Republican House of Representatives and all likelihood a Republican Senate? One bill in 18 years sounds like a pretty good aspiration for Moulton.
Josh, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say the Republicans have strong control of the House, and they can't even agree on an agenda to pass their own legislation like immigration reform. So I'm not exactly sure that arguing that Seth Moulton will be in the minority party will make that much of a difference. I also want to look back at what happened in New Hampshire, and obviously what I said before about how Republicans are facing a fundraising deficit nationally. You know, I see that the Republican House Chairman Ted Cruz got involved in those races in New Hampshire, and I think what it really exposed was that this party is still divided between a mainstream group that is largely controlled by John Boehner and a far-right group that is more allied with Ted Cruz and isn't willing to rule out a second government shutdown this year. And I think that's going to be a big problem, because I think think that the government shutdown was a disaster for Republicans last year that they're still recovering from.
Josh, I really appreciate it as a guy who has practiced politics to hear that interesting case. You're saying that Republicans are divided because they've just come through a primary, yet the primary last night in Massachusetts, well, John Tierney had some problems. Look, the essence of primary politics is to point out differences and then unite following the primary. That's politics 101. As to your charge of the shutdown from a year ago and Ted Cruz, Ian, is that really on the minds of Americans as we're, 55 days away from this upcoming midterm?
Well, absolutely not. And I think you want to talk about New Hampshire. I find it interesting that, we're talking about New Hampshire when the same articles that are being cited as to Republicans said that Carol Shea Porter is ready to be cut loose by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee because she's been so unimpressive. So I think New Hampshire 1 is an excellent pickup opportunity for Republicans, as is New Hampshire 2. But people aren't talking about something that happened in October of last year. What they're talking about is the long-lasting effects of Obamacare. What they're talking about is the disastrous foreign policy from the president. And I think Chuck Todd said it well today. We're approaching Jimmy Carter-like levels where the public does not have confidence in this president's domestic abilities, in his foreign policy abilities, and that's going to be a real problem come November. That's what people are talking about. This president dragging down Democrats across the country.
I think Chuck Todd's comment is ridiculous. I think that everyone always throws around the Jimmy Carter label every time that there's a midterm election. But I think that to say that the shutdown was something that happened last year and that it's in the distant memory and not something top of mind for Republicans in New Hampshire is ridiculous. This is something that a lot of your candidates still haven't ruled out trying again this year as a way to try and drag down President Obama. And look, I understand that using him as a boogeyman is the best election strategy because Republicans right now lack a comprehensive agenda. But I really do think that the threat of another shutdown is really going to tear down Republicans unless your candidates, especially those in New Hampshire, are willing to say that option is not on the table this year.
But Josh, certainly it's been part and parcel of midterm elections, the so-called 6-year itch, and we'll depersonalize it. I was the victim of a 6-year itch back in 2006. George W. Bush was unpopular at that time. President Obama is certainly unpopular. I appreciate the fact that people try to change to other issues, but like it or not, for both sides of the aisle, whomever is president, midterm of a second term usually encounters some difficulties. So isn't it going to be tough, Josh, to get out from under the Obama influence, that being his negative numbers going into November?
Well, of course, look, JD, I'm not going to argue that the sky is green and that this year is going to be a cakewalk for Democrats. But I think that we're in the middle of a tough time, and I think that one of the things that we're looking at tonight, as Obama talks about his plan going forward for ISIS, is, a lot of these Democrats certainly are in difficult positions. But, look, we elected President Obama back in 2008 to make very difficult decisions, in part because he said he wouldn't back another dumb war like the original invasion of Iraq. And so I think that his plan is going to have to be nuanced. And yes, Democrats are not going to be able to just say, we want to bomb every Middle Eastern country like Republican pundits and the former vice president are calling for them to do. So, look, of course, it's not going to be an easy election cycle. Obviously, I'm not going to say that Democrats are going to take back the House, but I do think that Republicans are facing a lot more handicaps than they're letting on.
Well, let's go to Ian here, and about a minute remains, Ian. What Josh just outlined here.
Sure.
The president's speech tonight.
Yeah.
Is that going to lead to further disunity on the left?
Well, I think it depends. I think the president has to go out there and lay out a clear and compelling strategy. But more than just lay out a clear and compelling strategy, the president has to inspire some confidence in the American people. It's not just what he says, it's how he says it. And he's a fan of using blistering rhetoric when he's out there trying to demonize Republicans. Maybe it's time he used that same approach to help inspire some confidence in Americans while instilling fear in those that would do harm to them.
All I can say is I wish Obama would be more partisan.
Well, my friendly advice is I think there's an element of truth there, Josh. If the president would treat our enemies the way he treats Republicans, he might do better in foreign policy, at least in terms of spoiling for the fight. This particular rhetorical battle will have to draw to a close. Gentlemen, we appreciate your insights and analysis. So, you heard from Josh on the left, from Ian on the right. Who is in the right in terms of the midterms? Why don't you send me your thoughts via Twitter @NewsmaxTV, #AmericasForum.